Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into what former acting ICE Director Tom Homan means when he says his agents have been unleashed. We're going to explore his take on a new era of enforcement, the data he's using to back it up, and what he sees as the single biggest threat to public safety.
All right, so here's what we're going to cover. We'll start with this idea of a new enforcement strategy, then look at an interesting and temporary detour for ICE agents at airports. We'll get into the numbers Homan uses to measure success, talk about the major roadblock he says is in the way, and finally, his call for cooperation to solve the problem.
So first, let's get right into the main idea from the interview, that there's a fundamental change happening right now in how immigration laws are being enforced inside the U.S.
Homan really frames this new era with a powerful statement. You see, he claims that after a time when agent morale was, in his words, in the toilet, there's been this huge turnaround, and agents can finally carry out their mission. So, you might be wondering, how is this actually happening? Well, according to Homan, because of increased security at the border, more personnel have been freed up, and that means more agents can be put back in the field, which is leading to a ramp-up of interior enforcement and, as he predicts, a real rise in arrests.
All right, next up, there's this really interesting bit about a temporary measure that, according to Homan, ended up revealing a pretty important truth about the dangers his agents face out on the street.
So, for a little while, ICE agents were actually moved over to airports. The thinking here was kind of twofold. First, to plug some security gaps, and second, to handle things like checking IDs, which let TSA agents really focus on the X-ray machines. The result? Travelers got through the lines faster.
And this is where Homan draws a really sharp contrast to make his point. He said he noticed that agents didn't wear masks at the airports, which he argues is proof that they were wearing them out on the streets for personal safety, against what he calls agitators assaulting them, and not for any other reason. He describes the airport as a totally safe environment where those masks just weren't necessary.
Okay, so let's shift gears and look at the numbers. How exactly is success being measured here? What does that look like?
Homan points to this data as straight-up proof of success, citing what he calls some pretty striking drops in net migration. I mean, just look at these numbers. El Paso down 95%, Denver down 72%, and Los Angeles down 67%. For Homan, these figures are direct evidence that the enforcement strategy is absolutely working.
So what's the big takeaway here from Homan's point of view? It all comes down to one word: deterrence. He's arguing that when the world sees this kind of active enforcement, with no catch and release, it sends a very clear message. And that message, he says, makes potential migrants a lot less likely to pay criminal cartels for that dangerous journey.
But it's not all smooth sailing. Despite these successes he's pointing to, Homan says his agency's up against a massive roadblock, one that he believes makes their job more dangerous and a whole lot less effective.
And that brings us to a really direct question that came up in the conversation. What does he see as the single biggest obstacle to public safety?
And his answer? It's immediate and it's clear: sanctuary policies. He defines these as local rules that basically stop police from cooperating with ICE, and he frames this issue as a direct threat to the safety of those communities.
And to really drive this point home, he doesn't just talk in generalities. He zooms in on one specific place, Fairfax County, Virginia, which he holds up as a prime example of the consequences of these non-cooperation policies.
He brings up some really serious criminal cases from the county, including 3 accused killers. Homan alleges these crimes involved illegal immigrants, and he connects them directly to the local sanctuary policy, presenting them as tragic and, in his view, preventable outcomes.
Okay, so if non-cooperation is the problem, what's the fix? Well, Homan lays out what he calls a pretty simple, common-sense solution.
He puts forward this idea that he says totally sidesteps the whole legal fight. He's basically saying, hey, local jurisdictions, you don't have to honor official ICE detainers, you don't have to hold anyone a single minute past their scheduled release.
So according to him, it all boils down to 2 incredibly simple steps. First, the local jail just needs to give ICE a call before they release a person of interest. Second, ICE agents, who he says can be waiting right nearby, will show up and take custody right there at the jail. He really presents it as just a matter of basic communication.
And look, he says this isn't just some idea on paper. He actually points to Minneapolis as a real-world example, saying they have record cooperation using this exact same model, which he sees as proof that it's practical and it works.
So, when you boil it all down, Homan's conclusion is that the real barrier isn't legal,
It isn't logistical, and it isn't financial. In his mind, the refusal to cooperate comes down to pure politics, framing it as politicians who hate Trump more than they care about public safety.
And that leaves us with this big, lingering question. Homan paints a picture of a really simple fix, a phone call, that's just being blocked by politics. But is it really that simple? This raises the much bigger question. What are the other sides of this argument? What are the complex legal, ethical, and community-based reasons that continue to fuel this intense debate over sanctuary policies?